Hello, everybody. It's Mark bringing you a sneak preview of some new enhancements we're going to be releasing soon around client information and FINTRAC compliance, everybody's favorite topic, I'm sure. I'm going to divide this video into a couple different parts. First, I'll go through sort of the agent flow in terms of adding client information, submitting listings and buying deals and all that sort of stuff and what you need to know for that. And then in the second segment, I'll go through for the brokers and staff, like how to set up which fields are mandatory, how things look in the transaction room review screen, compliance review process, and sort of all of that that you as agents may not necessarily be all that concerned about. But let me start with just the client information here. So one thing that isn't going to change is what information is required when you first enter in a new client. So this hasn't changed at all. We deliberately sort of moved this enhanced information, additional information to being completed when you actually enter in the listing or the buying deal so that you don't have to do this in advance and get all this information out. So if you want to add somebody to the system fairly quickly, you can still do that in the same manner that you would. So let me now go into sort of what it looks like when I go into a listing as an example. So if your brokerage currently has the FINTRAC settings in RealDesk turned on, and maybe they don't, because this has always been sort of a system setting. So you may see that some of these fields don't apply to you or have never applied to you, which is fine. But if you had the FINTRAC settings on before we released this, when you go into a listing or a deal where those fields existed, you'll see the section that says legacy FINTRAC details, and you'll see the old questions that we used to ask, right? So we asked them once per listing or once per deal. So FINTRAC risk level, client is politically exposed person, yes or no, and then FINTRAC transactions in the past 12 months, or I think that was a settable value as well. So you might see 3 months or something like that. So for listings and deals that were done the old way, you'll still see these fields to kind of maintain that backward compatibility. But when you're going to add a new listing, the process by which we get this information is going to change. So let me show you how this works. So I'm adding a new listing, and you'll see that those legacy FINTRAC fields are no longer there. And instead, next to each client, I've got this sort of FINTRAC button, which shows us red because not all of the information has been entered that is required by the brokerage. So instead of doing this like once per deal, we're now doing this for each individual, right? Which is obviously very important because you can have multiple sellers or buyers on a deal, and one of them might be a politically exposed person and one might not. So that's why we're doing it now at the individual sort of client level. So if I go into my first client here and I click on the Edit FINTRAC Client Fields button, what you'll see is that there will be the section that comes up, Client ID. You can also add this ahead of time, so it will show up in like the edit client section of the application and so on. So you can enter this ahead of time, but this is just a way to be able to do this like very easily and quickly when you go in and do a listing or a deal. So you'll see a whole bunch of different fields here, and again, each office will be able to choose which fields they want to make mandatory. So in this case, even though we have these ID fields around type of ID, ID number, expiry date, place of issue, this particular office has chosen not to make those mandatory. As you can see, there's no red around the field, no red outline or asterisks or anything like that. So those fields are not required, but they have chosen to make occupation, politically exposed person status, and FINTRAC risk level mandatory. So for occupation, it's not just what is this person's occupation, it's basically just a list of occupations that are deemed to be of interest, I suppose, or other / none. So if it's, your person doesn't do any of these things, you can click on other / none. Same thing basically for politically exposed person. This used to be just a yes or no, but there's actually different types of politically exposed persons. So instead of just yes or no, we have none, and then domestic, foreign, head of international organization. So if it's none, we can just click that. And then for FINTRAC risk level, there's not assessed and then low or high, right? So if I've assessed them and clicked determined that the risk level is low, then that's all I need to do, and that's it. So I'll just scroll down to the bottom here, click update, and then you'll notice that this button goes from red to green, which indicates that we have all of the required information for FINTRAC purposes, for the brokerage's purposes, for that particular client, then I would just repeat the exact same process for my next client, and that's all that I need to do. Then I'll be able to submit the listing as normal. Okay, so that covers the listing side of things. Now, the other place where you'll need to do this FINTRAC work is when you're adding a new buying deal, since there's no sort of listing equivalent there. And so here, regardless of whether you use the AI contract wizard or whether you use the old school way of just clicking submit a buying deal and then entering the information by hand, it's the same process. And it looks exactly the same way as it did on the listing, right? So you can see I have my two buyers here. They each have their sort of FINTRAC button. I can click on it and then I can add the information for each of them. And as I do that, that button will go from red to green. And as you can see, now I have all of that information. And that will factor into the overall sort of section completion status that shows. So you'll have to, in addition to all the other things that you'd be filling in, fill in this information, FINTRAC information for each of your clients, and only then will this transaction details section turn to green, and then I'll complete the other sections as I normally would and submit the deal, right? So in both cases, when you're submitting a listing or when you're submitting a buying deal, if any of these boxes for any of the sellers or buyers clients that you have are left red, it's going to tell you that it can't submit the listing or deal yet. So that's pretty much it from the agent side of things. I can go now into the sort of broker section and talk about how this looks in terms of the review process and also how you set up what's going to be mandatory versus not required for this new flow. Okay, so now I'll look at sort of the broker admin side of things. So first piece is to determine what you want to be mandatory, if anything. So if you had previously the FINTRAC setting turned on, and again, this was a setting that you could turn on or off. So if you had it off, it'll be off when we release this new piece. If you had it on, it will be turned on, but you'll have to decide which fields of these, if any, you want to have be mandatory, right? So as you can see, there's sort of four options here, right? So there's FINTRAC risk level, PEP status, politically exposed person, occupation, and then ID. And then ID itself has about four different fields, right? So type, number, expiry date, and place of issue, and all of those basically sort of go together as one. So you globally term sort of ID on or off, and then either all fields will be mandatory or none will. So that's sort of how you configure that. And then as well, you can configure what's called a compliance officer email, which is usually going to be your broker of record, or I would imagine so in most cases. It has to belong to somebody who currently has a staff role. So it could be broker, office admin, whatever, but it will check. And if it's that email belongs to somebody who's like not even on the system, it'll reject that. But that's basically how you set up the settings. And then I'll show you sort of how this now looks from the transaction room point of view. So for reviewing in the transaction room, we've implemented the same piece around existing listings and deals that were done with the former version of the FINTRAC fields. So if I click into a deal that was submitted a while ago, you'll see that I still show these same sort of legacy fields, right? So just the FINTRAC risk, low, medium, high, client is a politically exposed person, yes or no, FINTRAC relevant transactions, 0 or whatever the number is. So that's sort of the legacy piece, and you can continue to manipulate those and edit those on those deals that are done sort of the old way, again, just for backward compatibility purposes. But for new listings, new deals, so if I click into a listing that I just submitted, you'll first see that those legacy FINTRAC fields don't show up anymore in the new listing information. What it will show instead is in the client section. First of all, we're now listing all clients instead of just the main client, which used to be the case before. So now you'll see if there are 2 sellers, 3 sellers, however many sellers or buyers, you'll see all of them. But then you'll also see these FINTRAC buttons, and you'll see sort of a summary of the information here as well. So for Hannah, we can see that the risk is low, politically exposed person is none, and the occupation is not one of the ones that FINTRAC's concerned about, and that's why this button shows as green. for Todd, we can see low risk, not politically exposed person, but his occupation, cannabis dealer, is one of the ones that's sort of on that list. And so that FINTRAC button automatically then shows as yellow. If you click into this, same as for the agent, you can go in, you can edit any of their information, but you can also see specifically the required FINTRAC fields, and you can make any changes that you want to them, do any updates, and so on. Then the final piece of this is that if any of these sort of conditions are triggered, so the occupation's on the list, a politically exposed person is something other than none, risk is something other than low, and then if you had the ID fields enabled as well, it would flag things like an expired ID. So if the ID expiry date is before today, it would flag that as well. But if any of those things gets flagged, there's also a separate email that goes to that compliance officer that basically says, this deal or listing may need to be reviewed for compliance purposes. But that's essentially how it works. Should be fairly simple to do. We've tried to make it from a user flow as efficient as it possibly can be. There is a little bit more to do than previous because of the fields that we've added, and also because of the fact that, as we really should have been doing from the beginning, this needs to be done for each client. So if there's multiple buyers or sellers on a deal, then we're asking for that information about things like politically exposed person more than once. But it is the right way to do it, and something that we were asked for quite a bit by quite a few of you. So hopefully this works well. Always happy to get your feedback. Please let us know. And if you have any issues using it, whether as an agent, a broker, and so on, please feel free to contact our support line and we'll help you through that. Thanks, as always, for watching this video. Like and subscribe if you can. And thanks, as always, for being part of the RealDesk community.